Hey guys, Jay here from the Legion of Two, and today I wanted to talk about the Horus Heresy, but specifically what I love about the Horus Heresy. Now, I started the hobby when I was about 10, but unlike a lot of the other kids who were sort of in my age range, I wasn't really interested in painting the minis or learning how to play 4th ed, 40k, was it 3rd ed? 3rd or 4th, I can't really remember, it has been that long ago, but I was more interested in the lore. And even back then, the small tidbits we had for the Heresy really struck a chord with me. Now, back then, the Heresy itself was really just a small collection of references or small paragraphs in much larger books which dictated precisely how certain chapters and certain legions fell to chaos. And I have to admit, one of my favourite things was going down to the shop on the Veterans Night when I was young and basically listened to all the veterans talk about the lore. They would always tell you tidbits of books that I potentially hadn't read, mostly because they were from editions past that I'd never even got a chance to see, and it was something I would just soak up like a sponge. And I think to this day, the oldest books I own have to be the Index Astartes. Now, these originally were White Dwarf entries that were compiled into sort of a compilation series that consisted of 4 books, which detailed a lot of the earlier lore for all the legions that took part in the Heresy, and some additional bits about second founding chapters like the Black Templars, the Flesh Terrors, bits about vehicles, Terminator armor, renegades, etc. But for me, the main point was always just the legions pre-Heresy lore. If you've seen the books yourselves, you know that each legion has basically an entire section dedicated to it. It discusses the pre-Heresy, the post-Heresy, legion breakdown, chapter beliefs, etc. And it also had small tidbits about certain characters that made a large impact, and one of those was Captain Garrow. In the rather small paragraph about Garrow, it did go into some concepts of what he could have been, and I do remember that this led to a bit of a discussion in the shop where people were thinking, it did say that did he become a Death Guard? Did he become the Lord of Flies? Was he an apothecary? Did he become an Inquisitor? Was he the beginning of the Inquisitors? And these breadcrumbs allowed authors later on, i.e. James Swallow, to go into every single one of those theories and expand it into the Heresy series of books and make sure that each one was taken in its own direction and in some cases given a finality. For example, Solon Decius did become the Lord of Flies, Merrick Voyen became the apothecary who tried to cure Nurgle's rot and ended up falling. Well, until Garrow killed him. Now, expanding on from that, another big source of information was the Horus Heresy collectible card game that was made by Sabretooth. I think if I remember correctly, it came out around about 2002, 2003 maybe. Not only did it add more to the breadcrumbs by giving you little bits of lore on each individual card. When you'd buy a pack of 12, there would always be essentially a lore card. This ended up expanding into 2 rather large A3 Heresy books, in which all the lore was combined into one big section with a load of the beautiful artwork. It really is amazing when I look back on it to think that back then the Heresy was just a rather small but intricate part of 40k's narrative, but the Games Workshop must have known that they had a serious untapped resource that they could expand on and assist with their profit margin. When you look back on the early Heresy lore, it's amazing to see how the current books have just, in some ways, stayed true, but in other ways, completely changed the narrative. An example being that in those days, the siege of the Imperial Palace was 55 days long, and on the 55th day, the Emperor beamed aboard the Vengeful Spirit to fight Horus. If memory serves, currently, I believe the Heresy siege, in regards to the Siege of Terra big novels, has been going on for like 600 to 700 plus days. The Heresy itself was almost like, if it wasn't some type of group project, it was a bit of a mystery in which you had to piece all the information together yourself, and it also gave you the concept to come up with your own theories. And in a way, it was treated as if it was a status of being a veteran, when you truly knew about the heresy and when you knew a lot of that knowledge that you were able to speak with the older guys in the shop regarding this, it was almost like you'd reached sort of a different level. You know, you'd been promoted. You weren't just a kid who went to the shop now. You were really committed to the cause. In that instance, Games Workshop had really got their hooks into you. And I remember my excitement seeing the books had finally came along. You know, I opened my White Dwarf and I saw coming soon Horus Rising, and I was like, oh my god, this is going to be amazing. But even I have to admit that when I first read Horus Rising, in my mind, I was expecting something a bit more condensed. I didn't know at that point in time, and I don't think any of us did, how long a series this was going to be. You know, it was good to get a lot of the backstory of Horus, the legions, a lot of the in-depth approach. But in my mind, I was kind of akin to Milhouse in that episode of The Simpsons asking,
when are they gonna get to the fireworks factory?
But as time went on, I did begin to understand that the more in-depth these books went, the more knowledge it was giving me. And that was just great because it made me feel young again, essentially, that I could just soak up all this information and begin to see even ideas that I could put into the game itself. One of the core concepts I'd always had since I'd started reading the books, before Forge World had even done their big black books, was a concept I called the Loyal Traders, which was basically the loyalists of Istvan 3. I had this idea in my head that I would have mixed bag units of varied painted guys, you know, like say 3 Death Guard, a couple of Emperor's Children, a couple of World Eaters, and a Son of Horus, and they would make a 40k tactical squad. But back then, there was no older iterations of armor than Mark 7. So for me, being a bit of a Puritan in that regard, the idea at that point in time never really got off the ground. And then Forge World decided to drop the Black Heresy books. And for me, that was almost something akin to the Second Coming. I finally had the Heresy book, I had Legion army lists, I had Primarchs coming, I had Mark 3, Mark 4, Mark 2 armor, a varied amount of upgrades. And I can say probably without a shadow of a doubt, I've potentially spent £10,000 plus in the years since the first Black Book came out, collecting Heresy armies, collecting the Black Books, and every additional add-on piece that has come onto it. Now, some people might say that the Heresy has went on too long and we have too much information, and I don't know whether to agree on that or not, because I personally believe that we got too much information in some places and not enough in places that actually mattered. Despite the problems though, when I think of the Heresy and about how niche it was in a game that was already niche, it is something that always just grabbed my attention and is one of the things to this day that I just love to talk about. I could talk about it for hours upon end. But what do you think? Are you a fan of the Heresy? Do you think it's went on too long? Are you waiting for Heresy 2.0 before you even consider it? Let me know in the comments below, and as usual, please like, sub, and do all that usual stuff. Thank you now. Bye-bye.